I am just after reading the great book of a great German philosopher of the Baroque era and the beginning of the Enlightenment era, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who has served as a was a courtier in Hanover, and he was also a protege of the Princess Sophie of Hanover. He was urged by Sophie von Hanover to write some concise, some book about that would be a little bit that would be an answer to a book of Pierre Bayle. Pierre Bayle was of an opinion that that religion and science are not really compatible, and that the reason and religion are not compatible. And Leibniz, in very, although I am I differ from Leibniz when it comes to my viewpoint, of course, because I'm an atheist, but I must say that he has made a very good job when it comes to rational thinking and deducting and the logic. Because when, among others, Max Weber in the 19th century has observed, when you accept the first irrationality that you are religious, then you can be very rational about the implications of it. And that's the case of Leibniz, and I would recommend also to my atheist friends and also to my religious friends to be acquainted with the thought of Leibniz. And when it comes to being religious or not, I am of an opinion that it mostly depends on our psychology. It mostly depends on how we feel psychologically with the impression of having a God within the cosmos or having him not. For me, the neutral world in which this is maybe even cold and unfriendly, but it's without God makes more sense and makes me more well, I don't know, comfortable. And the same can happen to my friends. For instance, one of my friends who is a Lutheran, he is said that he would not feel comfortable in a world when there is no God and no some father figure to care a little bit about the humankind. Well, okay, so Sophie of Hanover has urged her courtier Leibniz to write something against the against the philosophical dictionary of Pierre Bayle. Pierre Bayle was to some extent he has started this element of thinking typical for Enlightenment, that the world is not good, and maybe we shouldn't praise God so much because he did a lousy job creating world, because the world is so very far from perfect. And in the same time he was stating that it's not the fear of God that makes us good citizens, for instance, and not committing crimes, it's the police. So Bayle has constructed the secular way of thinking. In the same time he also constructed a way of thinking in which the reason and religion are incompatible. But it could be argumented argumented in the opposite direction, and the work of Leibniz can prove. Leibniz is starting with the Jewish people as the only people that in the ancient times have really started with the very clear dogmas about what to do, what not to do, and this has everything to do with the monotheism, and because they were the only consistent monotheistic people. Page 5 here in the Polish edition. Okay. Leibniz is certain that the Christian should know the perfectness of the perfect nature of God to be able to praise him. So it's very essential that he would think that God is very much perfect in what he is doing. So it's a very important method to answer to the claims of Mr. Bale. If something is already determined, then maybe the God is it's God's fault. Everything that is going badly, it's God's fault, and Leibniz is preparing himself to answer to this. He is under the impression that Mr. Bale imagines in the image of God in Mr. Bale's brain is that God is treating us like worms which are not dignified enough to be in his thoughts. If so, the fall of humankind it happened with the permission of God, because God doesn't want to be a despot. This is yeah. Okay. By the way, Mr. Leibniz was impressed with the philosophical dictionary of Bale, and by no means he was saying that it is a lousy work. He was impressed. He praised and thanked Bale for starting the discussion about so many interesting and important things. Here is a passage from it's a fragment from Bale's quotation. I will not quote, but the general sense is that God could manipulate with, for instance, every ship, every machinery that people created, like ships, like machines, in such a way that everything would be going perfectly and smoothly, and this machine will never stop or break or something like that. But the Leibniz says that we wouldn't even recognize if this work of the machine is doing in such a way or not. So let's not think about that. Because how could you recognize what is causing the work? Leibniz was under the world of Leibniz, the physics of Leibniz and metaphysics of Leibniz is that the monad, the first the particle that is creating the world by one put to another, must be spiritual, because it cannot be divided. If it's indivisible, it must be spiritual. So it must be like like an idea of Plato. First the idea, then the physical world. Okay, so this is also one of his arguments for the existence of God, of course, but not the main one. He is under the impression that the newest physical statements about physics have proven that most of the factors in physics, in motion and so on, are not determined, are more voluntary than it was previously thought. He has stated also that the reason and the faith, they're both based on experience. And because when we think about China, we quote somebody who saw China. When we are talking about miracles, we also are talking about people who saw miracles. So it's not that far away from each other, and very curious thing that's true. When it comes to the simple logic, it's true. Okay. This is a huge discussion about if God is making a miracle, then is he really subverting all the law of physics and all the order that he has created or not. later on we'll see that Leibniz thinks it's not. He's just putting one thing better, making one thing better by making a miracle, so that the whole system will not fall apart, will go more smoothly. Smooth. It would be like something like the Duke of Salinas says in Lampedusa's Gattopardo. He said that something must be changed in order to make all the other things unchanged, the system unchanged. Okay. Okay. Now he says something about the Aristotelian logics, that it's very often despised today. I mean, the late 17th century, of course. He's also saying that Mr. Bale is not does not understand that our human brain and God's brain are really of the same nature, but the God's brain is like an ocean and our brain is like a drop of water. So one I don't know, a cup of water. Okay. Mr. Bale is saying that our senses are failing. For instance, when we seeing the lighthouse, and we think that the shape is round because we don't see the edges from a huge distance, but it doesn't prove anything, because our reason is stronger than our senses. So we are very much, very well prepared for happiness and working well in the universe, in the world, by God, after all, says Leibniz. Leibniz is also saying that we must first want to think, and then we are thinking. So he was very close to Hume and a motivist. He was an emotivist. So we have a tendency to want thinking. The same tendency, a similar one, is towards good, but about that later. Bale was under the impression, Pierre Bale was under the impression that our human brain is very good only for destruction. We can destruct the whole systems of knowledge, but we cannot really create anything new. But Leibniz says this way of thinking is very flawed, because it's very wrong, because we are, okay, we are destructing something, but the whole pile of knowledge is getting bigger, not smaller, but by challenging the false truths that appeared to be until this moment as true, but they are proven to be not true. So he's not in accordance with Mr. Bale about the limitation of human brain, that there are so huge limitations and so little, so small capabilities. Okay, here is about the free will, that people are created, that they are very close to falling, very close to fall, but they have this tendency to making good, and so we have to be programmed in such a way to be able to cooperate with God on our own salvation, because we are cooperating with Him in this for working for our individual salvation, and God is some sort of our partner in this. He's not a despot. Okay. Bale was under the impression that the bad things in the world are prevailing and the good things are innumerous, and Leibniz is not in accordance with this. He says that we are lacking our attendance at judging those things. If we were ill all the time, and we would have only short breaks of being well, then we would really appreciate being well. But if it's the other way around, and it is the other way around, we're usually well, then we think that the illness makes a much more huge impression, and we think that it's more or less equal portion of good and bad, although it's not. So if it's so good, so why it is so bad? So unde malum, from where the evil comes through. So the man is created innocent but close to failing, and this is close to the fall, and it must be so, because otherwise we wouldn't have the possibility of making our free will. And the same is about the small amounts of relatively small amounts of bad things, so that people would be capable of fighting for the good things. So it's not Leibniz is saying that all comparisons between the humans who are kings, the human kings, between kings and the god, are not very good and wise, those comparisons, because God has totally different outlook and totally different project going on. The project is individual salvations of how many souls it's possible. And king is, for instance, Baal was under the impression that God would make a very bad king, because he would allow bad things to happen for ages before he would intervene and make it all good. And he says, yes, that's true, but the king has totally different situation and totally different projects going on. The same was about the argument of Malebranche, who has said that even if God is Malebranche was under the impression that even if we do something against God, we think we do something in accordance to God, but he also thought that God is able to change his order of things, and he said that, and Leibniz says that it's not the case. He's just making one element better, or one element better by miracle, and he's not subverting the whole order at all. So Leibniz is saying that Baal and the others are they are making their image of God too anthropomorphic. Here is the part about which the great fan of Leibniz's thought, Mr. Alexander Pope, the famous poet laureate of England. Alexander Pope says, all partial evil, harmony not understood, all discord, harmony not understood, all partial evil, universal good. It means that we are unable, because every person is seeing only a fragment of the world, and it's true, and also our experience is limited. And that's why we think that the world is much more flawed, that much more bad than it really is. Mr. Baal is saying that history is only the chain of misdemeanors and crimes, and Leibniz says far from that. There are much more. It's true that there are many prisons and hospitals, but there are much more normal houses than prisons and hospitals. Are they not? Okay, and so if some people says that if God is not making the perfect decision all the time, lacks power or lacks goodness, and Leibniz says it's only true when we forget about how the whole idea of salvation is operating, that people are bestowed with some free will, and it must be the situation as the result in which there are some evil is permitted. if God is responsible also for evil, then maybe it's a bad thing to punish criminals, says some philosophers say. And Leibniz is saying that it's God is not responsible because he's not forcing people to do good. He is only bestowing them with some tendency of making good things. So he also, that's true, he is creating sin, that's true, but he does not mean that God is bad, because when we have no small portion of sin presented to us, then we cannot really appreciate good things, which are much more numerous. But if there were only good things, then the least good things of them, they would be perceived as bad. So why not just having some bad things for comparison? And only in such milieu, only in such conditions, the human free will can operate. And that's true. Here is that God only has to be tending to good things, that maybe God is not free. And Leibniz is saying and reminding that going and thinking and acting according to our own tendencies, according to our own structure of our brain, is not the opposite of freedom. It is freedom. And also that for a wise man, some things that are good and things that are needed, and something that's determined, and and some things that are good are very close to each other. So when God is the wise man, like a wise man, but far more wise, then naturally those things come closer to each other. So even other way maybe. So then of course we can see that but our human brain is incapable of seeing this, so we perceive it as some sort of contradiction. And okay, so about I would recommend reading Leibniz to all my fellow believers and unbelievers. I am an atheist myself, but I must say that I am really impressed by the quality of and logic Mr. Leibniz has put into the Théodicée. And this can be very interesting, because there are many philosophers which were not defending God and the compatibility between religion and science and knowledge, reason, whatever, so well as Leibniz was doing. Usually, for instance, in the age of the 18th century, in the age of 19th century, usually the defenders of faith and religion, they were concentrating on these very subjective things and so on, not very, and usually they were departing from the pure reason. Whereas Leibniz had made the very maybe the finest attempt to make reason and religion compatible. And it's very hard for me to understand why only Protestants are really quoting Leibniz today, as they try to defend religion as something worth doing, worth believing in, and so on. But of course, Catholics like popes and so on, maybe they are just too competitive with Protestants and Protestant thinkers than to accept that. But Leibniz was very much involved in something that we would call ecumenic thinking today. So it really puzzles me why the thinker that has made the finest, perhaps the finest attempt to make the religion and reason compatible is somewhat neglected here.